The surveillance camera footage at St. Jude's Medical Center recorded the precise moment the piece shattered. 1 second it was an ordinary Friday night. The next a 300-pound security guard was hurled across the waiting room like a rag doll. The attacker, a 7-foot-tall giant screaming in a language of pure fury, ripping through the ER doors like they were made of cardboard. Doctors froze in place. Police were minutes away. Patients were shrieking. The only thing standing between this unstoppable force and a room full of helpless people was Elle, a 5'2" rookie nurse on her third shift. Everyone assumed she was going to die. They were wrong. Here is the true story of how the smallest person in the room became its greatest hero. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room at St. Jude's Medical Center in downtown Seattle hummed with that particular frequency that only healthcare workers seem to notice, a low electric buzz that signals the calm before a devastating storm. It was 10:15 p.m. on a Friday. In the medical world, they call this the witching hour, the exact moment when the happy hour drunks transition into the overdose cases and the domestic disputes start pouring out of living rooms and into the trauma bay. Elle Bennett adjusted her scrub top, tugging it down nervously. It was slightly too large for her. Standing at just 5'2" with a frame that looked like a strong gust could knock it over. Elle did not look like she belonged in the chaotic trenches of a level 1 trauma center. She looked like a librarian who had wandered down the wrong hallway. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail that bobbed slightly as she checked the vitals monitor for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "Stop fidgeting, Bennett. You are making the patients uneasy." The voice cut through the air like a scalpel. It belonged to Brenda Miller, the charge nurse. Brenda was a legend at St. Jude's, a 50-year-old veteran who had survived the crack epidemic of the 80s, the gang wars of the 90s, and 3 hospital mergers. She had arms like a dock worker and a patient's threshold of 0. To Brenda, Elle was just another traveler, a temporary nurse filling a gap, likely to wash out before her contract expired. "Sorry, Brenda," Elle murmured, keeping her eyes on the chart. "Just double-checking Mr. Henderson's O2 saturation. It is dipping slightly. It is dipping because he is 90 years old and he is holding his breath every time you hover over him," Brenda snapped, not looking up from her computer. "Go check bed 4. Dr. Reynolds needs a catheter set up, and do not mess it up like the last rookie." Elle swallowed her pride and nodded. She knew what they whispered about her in the break room. She had heard Reynolds, the arrogant attending physician with the jawline of a movie star and the ego to match, laughing with the residents earlier that evening. "She looks like a high school volunteer," Reynolds had joked. "If a code gray comes in, what is she going to do? Politely ask the meth head to sit down. I give her 2 weeks." They did not know Ella. They did not know where she had been for the past 5 years, or why her hands, though small, were steadier than any surgeon's in the building. They saw the rookie tag on her badge and the way she kept her head down, and they assumed she was weak. They were making the classic mistake, confusing silence for submission. The ER doors whooshed open, admitting a gust of cold, rainy Seattle air and 2 paramedics wheeling in a stretcher. Overdose female mid-20s, one of the paramedics shouted, his voice tight, unresponsive but breathing, "BP is 90/60. The room snapped into action. Dr. Reynolds strode forward, barking orders. "Get her to trauma 2. Brenda, get a line started. Bennett, stay out of the way." Ella stepped back against the wall, her hands clasped behind her back. She watched the dance, the chaotic, beautiful choreography of saving a life. She noted that Reynolds was skilled, his movements precise, but he was too loud. He fed off the adrenaline, ramping up the tension in the room rather than calming it. Brenda was the anchor, moving with heavy, sure steps, but Ella's eyes drifted away from the trauma bay. She looked toward the main sliding glass doors of the ambulance bay. Something felt off. It was not a sound, it was a vibration, a low thrumming that seemed to rattle the floor tiles beneath her sneakers. She watched the security guard, a burly man named Mike, Big Mike Cogan, look up from his desk. Mike was 6'4", a former defensive lineman for the University of Washington. He was the hospital's first line of defense, a man who had tackled knife-wielding psych patients without breaking a sweat. Elle saw Mike's face change. The boredom vanished, replaced by confusion, and then a flicker of genuine fear. "Unit 1 to dispatch," Mike said into his radio, his voice carrying across the waiting room. I do not know what I have got. There is a vehicle moving fast in the ambulance lane. It is not an ambulance." Elle stepped away from the wall, her instincts flaring. "Brenda," she said, her voice low but cutting through the noise of the trauma bay. "Not now, Bennett," Brenda yelled, trying to find a vein on the overdose patient. Brenda looked at the monitors, Elle said, pointing not to the medical screens but to the security feed above the nurse's station. On the grainy black and white screen, a dark SUV had just crashed through the metal bollards at the entrance of the ambulance bay. Steam was pouring from its radiator. The driver's side door was kicked open, literally kicked, hanging off its hinges, and then he stepped out. Even on the small screen, the man was impossible to comprehend. He was massive. He wore a torn grey hoodie that strained against muscles that looked like hydraulic pistons. He stood in the pouring rain, his head tilted back, letting the water wash over a face contorted in a scream that the camera could not capture, but the soul could feel. "Who is that?" Dr. Reynolds asked, pausing for a split second as he looked up at the screen. "That," Elle whispered, her eyes narrowing. "Is a problem." The man on the screen did not walk toward the ER doors. He charged. He moved with a terrifying speed for a man of his size. He covered the 20 yards from the SUV to the glass doors in seconds. Big Mike stood up, his hand going to the taser on his belt. "Sir, stop right there. This is a restricted area." The automatic doors did not open fast enough. The man did not wait. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into the tempered glass. The sound was like a gunshot. The safety glass shattered into a million diamonds raining down onto the linoleum. The entire ER went silent. The beeping of the heart monitors seemed to grow deafeningly loud. Through the broken frame stepped the intruder. In person, he was even larger than on the screen. He had to be 7 feet tall. His skin was flushed a deep violet red, veins bulging from his neck like thick cords. His eyes were wild, the pupils blown out so fully that his eyes looked like black holes. He was frothing slightly at the mouth. This was not just a drunk. This was not just a junkie. This was excited delirium syndrome, a state of extreme agitation where the body's adrenaline reserves dump all at once, granting the person hysterical strength and imperviousness to pain. "I said freeze," Big Mike shouted, stepping into the center of the hallway, leveling his taser. The giant did not even look at Mike. He looked through him. He let out a roar that shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. "Where is she?" the giant screamed, his voice a gravelly distortion of human speech. "Give her to me." "Last warning," Mike yelled. He fired the taser. The 2 prongs hit the giant square in the chest. The wires went taut, the electrical discharge, 50,000 volts designed to drop a grown man instantly, crackled through the air. The giant looked down at the wires in his chest. He did not convulse. He did not fall. He simply reached up, grabbed the wires with a massive hand, and ripped the barbs out of his own flesh as if he were plucking a stray thread. Blood trickled down his grey hoodie. He smiled, a broken, bloody smile. "Mike, run," Elle whispered. The giant lunged at Big Mike, a man who weighed 260 pounds braced for impact. It did not matter. The giant backhanded him. It was a casual, dismissive motion like swatting a fly. Mike's feet left the ground. He flew backward, airborne for a terrifying 2 seconds before smashing into the triage desk, shattering the computer monitors and crumpling to the floor unconscious. Screams erupted. Patients scrambled off gurneys, tripping over IV lines. Dr. Reynolds, the man who had mocked Elle's toughness just an hour ago, was backing away, his face pale as a sheet, holding a clipboard like a shield. Security code, grey code, silver. "Get the police," Brenda screamed, grabbing the phone, her hands shaking for the first time in 20 years. The giant stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing heavily, scanning the room. His eyes locked onto the trauma bay where the young female overdose patient lay. He bellowed. He was not calling for the nurse. He was calling for the patient. And Nurse Elle Bennett, the rookie who was supposed to wash out in 2 weeks, realized 2 things instantly. First, this monster was here to harm that girl. Second, nobody else in this room could stop him. Ella did not retreat. Reynolds hid behind a crash cart and Brenda dialed 911. Elle quietly reached into her pocket and unclipped her pen light. She took a deep breath, slowing her heart rate down through sheer force of will. She took 1 step forward, placing herself directly in the path of the 7-foot titan. "Hey," she shouted, her voice surprisingly deep, projecting from her diaphragm. The giant turned his head, looking down at the tiny woman in the oversized scrubs. He looked confused, like a tank wondering why a flower was blocking its path. "Get out of my way, little girl," the giant growled, stepping toward her. The ground trembled with his footfall. Ella did not flinch. She did not blink. She stood her ground, 5'2" against 7 feet of homicidal rage. "I cannot do that," Elle said, her voice steady. The giant raised a fist the size of a cinder block. The fist that descended toward Elle Bennett's head was heavy enough to crack a skull like an eggshell. It moved with the velocity of a wrecking ball. Dr. Reynolds, peeking out from behind the crash cart, squeezed his eyes shut. He did not want to see the new nurse die, but the sound of impact never came. At the very last fraction of a second, Elle did not back away. She stepped in. It was a move that defied every survival instinct a human being possesses. When a monster swings at you, you run away. But Ella stepped into the giant's guard, dipping her left shoulder. The massive fist whistled past her ear, the wind of it blowing a loose strand of hair across her face. She was now inside his reach, close enough to smell the sour stench of old sweat, metallic blood, and the chemical tang of methamphetamine pouring off him. Ella did not pause to admire her dodge. Her movement was fluid, practiced, and terrifyingly precise. As she pivoted on her back foot, her right elbow shot upward like a piston. It connected squarely with the giant's solar plexus, a bundle of nerves just below the sternum. It was a solid hit, a hit that would have dropped a normal man to his knees gasping for air. The giant merely grunted. He stumbled back half a step, looking down at his chest in confusion. The drugs coursing through his veins were acting as a suit of armor, dulling the pain signals before they could reach his brain. "You hit me," the giant rumbled. The confusion in his eyes was replaced by a cold homicidal focus. "You little gnat." Brenda L. yelled, not taking her eyes off the Titan. "Clear the trauma bay. Get the patient out the back now." But Brenda stammered, paralyzed by the absurdity of the scene. "Move," L. barked. It was not the voice of a subordinate. It was the voice of a commander. Brenda snapped out of her trance. She grabbed the gurney of the overdose patient, the girl the giant had called for, and began wheeling her backward toward the double doors leading to radiology. The giant roared. He saw his prize slipping away. He lunged forward, ignoring Elle, reaching out with a hand the size of a shovel to grab the railing of the gurney. He never made it. Il Bennett moved again. This time she did not strike. She intercepted. As the giant reached out, Ella grabbed his wrist. To an observer it looked laughable, her tiny pale hand wrapping around a wrist as thick as a telephone pole. But Ella did not try to hold him back. She knew physics. She knew she could not stop a freight train, but she could derail it. She pulled with his momentum, dropping her center of gravity and extending her leg across his path. It was a textbook judo throw, adapted for a size disparity that should not have been possible. She twisted her hips, using his own forward velocity against him. For a split second, the laws of gravity seemed to suspend. The 7-foot giant's feet left the floor. He rotated in the air, a look of pure shock on his blood-streaked face. He hit the linoleum floor with the force of a car collision. The ground shook so hard that instruments on the stereo trays rattled. Dr. Reynolds' jaw dropped. He stood up from behind the crash cart, forgetting his fear for a moment. Ella did not celebrate. She did not pose. She knew better. She knew that with excited delirium the body does not register trauma. A throw like that would break a normal man's ribs. For this guy it was just an annoyance. "Stay down," Elle ordered, backing away, her hands raised in a defensive posture that looked strikingly similar to Krav Maga. The giant did not stay down. He rolled over, a guttural growl erupting from his throat. He pushed himself up, his nose now bleeding freely from the impact. He looked at Ella, not with anger anymore, but with a predator's curiosity. He reached down and ripped a bolted, down metal IV pole right out of the floor. The screws shrieked as they were torn from the concrete. He held the 6-foot metal pole like a baseball bat. "Okay," Elle whispered to herself, her eyes scanning the room for options. "Plan B. Who are you?" Dr. Reynolds shouted, his voice cracking. "What are you doing?" "Doctor, shut up and get behind the blast doors," Elle yelled without looking at him. The giant swung the IV pole. He was aiming for Elle's head. She ducked, but not fast enough to clear it completely. The heavy metal base of the pole clipped her shoulder. Ella cried out, stumbling sideways. The pain was blinding. Her left arm went numb instantly. She hit the wall, sliding down, gasping for breath. "Got you," the giant sneered. He raised the pole for a killing blow. Ella looked up. Her vision was swimming. She saw the metal pole rising. She saw the fluorescent lights flickering. She saw the terrified faces of the nurses huddled by the nurses' station. She knew she could not take another hit. If that pole connected with her skull, she was dead. And if she died, the girl on the gurney died, and probably Brenda too. Ella's hand fell to her side, brushing against the pockets of her oversized scrubs. Her fingers grazed something hard and plastic, the trauma shears. Every nurse carries them, heavy-duty scissors designed to cut through leather, denim, and even pennies. They were not a weapon. They were a tool. But in the hands of someone who understood anatomy, a tool became a lifeline. As the giant brought the pole down, Elle did not dodge. She lunged forward from her crouch, exploding upward like a coiled spring. She drove her good shoulder into his midsection, not to hurt him, but to get inside the arc of his swing. The pole smashed into the wall behind her, shattering the plaster where her head had been a microsecond before. Ella was now pressed against his chest. She grabbed his collar with her numb left hand, gritting her teeth against the agony. And with her right hand she drove the blunt handle of the trauma shears into the soft point, just under his jawline, the mandibular angle. It was a pressure point technique known to subdue aggressive patients, but she applied it with tremendous force. The giant gagged, his eyes watered. The pole clattered to the floor, but he did not drop. His massive hands came up and wrapped around Ella's throat. He lifted her off the ground. Ella kicked her feet, dangling a foot in the air. His grip was like iron. She could feel her windpipe compressing. Black spots began to dance in her vision. She clawed at his hands, but it was like clawing at granite. "You fight good," the giant rasped, his face inches from hers. Spittle landed on her cheek. "But you are too small." Ella's vision began to tunnel. The sounds of the ER faded into a high-pitched whine. She saw Brenda screaming, but she could not hear the words. She saw Big Mike groaning on the floor, trying to crawl toward his weapon which had skidded across the room. "I am going to die here," Ella thought, on a Friday night in Seattle. "Sorry, Mom." But as the oxygen left her brain, a memory flashed. Not a memory of nursing school, a memory of sand, heat, the weight of a rucksack. A sergeant screaming at her in the desert. "Bennett, when you are choked, you do not pull away. You attack the source. Break the lever." Elle stopped clawing at his hands. She let her body go limp for a split second. The giant, thinking she was passing out, loosened his grip by a fraction of a millimeter to adjust his hold. That was all she needed. She swung her legs up, wrapping them around the giant's waist. She used her core strength to crunch upward, bringing her face level with his. And then she did the only thing she had left. She slammed her forehead into the bridge of his nose. A headbutt, the Glasgow kiss. Cartilage collapsed, blood exploded outward. The giant howled, dropping Elle. She hit the floor hard, rolling backward, gasping for air, clutching her throat. The giant staggered back blindly, clutching his ruined face. He backed into a tray of surgical instruments, sending scalpels and forceps clattering across the floor. "Police!" a voice shouted from the entrance. Two officers burst through the shattered sliding doors, guns drawn. "Drop it! Get on the ground!" the lead officer screamed at the giant. The giant turned to face the police. Blood was pouring down his face, masking his features in a crimson mask. He did not look afraid. He looked annoyed. He roared and charged the police officers. "Do not shoot," Elle croaked, her voice a raspy whisper. "There are oxygen tanks behind him." She saw what the police did not. Directly behind the charging giant was the respiratory therapy cart loaded with 4 tanks of compressed oxygen. If the police fired and missed, or if a bullet passed through the giant, the resulting explosion would level the entire ER wing. The officers hesitated. The giant was 10 feet away from them. Ella scrambled to her feet. Her shoulder was screaming in agony. Her throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. But she started running, not away from the danger, toward it again. She had to stop the police from firing. She had to stop the giant from harming the police. She dove, sliding across the floor like a baseball player stealing home, aiming for the officer's legs. "Do not shoot." Elle's shoulder slammed into Officer Jenkins's legs just as his finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed tiled space of the ER, but because of Elle's tackle, the barrel of the Glock 17 jerked downward. The bullet did not hit the giant, and it did not hit the volatile oxygen tank stacked on the cart behind him. Instead, it punched a hole through the linoleum floor, sending up a spray of concrete dust. "What the hell?" Jenkins screamed, scrambling on the floor, trying to kick Elle off him. He did not understand. He thought this crazy nurse had just attacked him to save the monster. The tanks, Elle hissed, rolling off him and pointing at the oxygen flammable warning labels that were now directly in the line of fire. "You shoot those, we all burn." But the distraction had cost them. The giant, whose name the hospital would later learn was Marcus Thorne, did not waste the opportunity. While Ella and Jenkins were tangled on the floor and the second officer, a rookie named Miller, was hesitating with shaking hands, Thorne moved. He did not charge the cops. He knew better. Even in his delirium, the tactical part of his brain, the part trained by the Marine Corps before his dishonorable discharge, was still functioning. He sought cover and leverage. Thorne lunged to his left, grabbing the nearest human shield. It was Dr. Reynolds, The handsome, arrogant attending physician had been trying to crawl toward the exit. He was not fast enough. Thorne's hand, slick with blood, clamped around Reynolds' neck. He lifted the doctor effortlessly, dragging him backward into Trauma Bay 1. "Back up," Thorne roared, his voice sounding wet and garbled due to the broken nose Elle had given him. "Back up or I snap his neck like a twig." Officer Miller held his gun leveled at the pair. "Drop the weapon." "Let him go, I do not have a weapon." Thorne grinned, his teeth red. He tightened his grip. Reynolds' face turned a shade of violet that did not look human. His eyes bulged, pleading silently. "I am the weapon." Thorne kicked the sliding glass door of Trauma Bay 1 shut. He dragged Reynolds into the corner, out of the direct line of sight from the hallway, effectively fortifying himself. The ER fell into a terrified silence, broken only by the distant sirens of approaching backup and the sobbing of a unit clerk under her desk. Elle pushed herself up from the floor. Her uniform was ruined, stained with floor wax and blood. Her ponytail had come loose, hair hanging in her face. Her left arm was throbbing with a dull, sickening ache that suggested a hairline fracture from the IV pole strike. Officer Jenkins stood up, furious. He grabbed Ella by her good arm. "You just assaulted a police officer. You let him take a hostage. What is wrong with you?" Elle did not flinch. She turned to look at Jenkins, and for the first time the nervous rookie mask was completely gone. Her eyes were hard, cold flint. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping an octave, stripping away the customer service politeness she had used for weeks. "Check your 6. If you had fired that second shot, that O2 tank would have turned this wing into a fireball. I did not assault you. I saved your life. Now let go of my arm before I break your thumb." Jenkins blinked, stunned. He let go. "Brenda," Elle barked, turning to the charge nurse who was frozen by the medication dispenser. "Yes," Brenda stammered. The veteran nurse looked at Elle as if she were a stranger. "Lock down the unit. Divert all incoming ambulances to Harborview. Get the walking wounded out the fire exit. I want this floor clear of civilians in 2 minutes." "Move on it," Brenda said, and immediately started shouting orders, grateful to have direction. Elle turned back to the sliding glass door of Trauma Bay 1. Through the smudged glass, she could see the silhouette of the giant holding Reynolds. She could see Reynolds' legs kicking feebly. "He is not going to kill him yet," Elle muttered, her brain working through the tactical matrix. "He needs leverage. He wants the girl." "Who are you?" Officer Jenkins asked, staring at her. "You are supposed to be a temp." Elle ignored him. She walked over to the nurse's station and grabbed the patient chart for the overdose victim, the girl Thorne had come for. She needed intel. If she was going to bring this Titan down, she needed to know why he was here. She flipped open the chart. Patient name Emily Thorne, age 24. Next of kin Marcus Thorne, brother. Do not contact per patient request. Restraining order on file. Elle closed the file. It was not a romance gone wrong, it was domestic terror. A brother obsessed with controlling his sister, pushed over the edge by drugs and madness. "He is her brother," Elle said to the room. "And he is not leaving without her." 10 minutes passed. The atmosphere in the ER was thick enough to choke on. The Seattle Police Department had arrived in force. A perimeter was set up outside. A SWAT team was en route, but Friday night traffic in downtown Seattle meant they were at least 15 minutes away. Inside the ER it was a stalemate. The hallway was cleared. Officers Jenkins and Miller were crouched behind the nurses' station, guns trained on the door of Trauma Bay 1. Inside the bay, Marcus Thorne was pacing like a caged tiger, dragging a sputtering Dr. Reynolds with him. He had barricaded the door with a heavy crash cart. "Send her in," Thorne screamed through the glass. "Send Emily in or the doctor dies." Elle stood behind the police line, leaning against the wall, icing her shoulder with a chemical cold pack. She was watching Thorne through the gap in the blinds. "He is cycling," Elle observed quietly. "What?" Jenkins asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The excited delirium," Elle explained, her eyes never leaving the target. "It comes in waves. The adrenaline dump is peaking. His temperature is skyrocketing. Look at him." Thorne was sweating profusely now. He had ripped his hoodie off, revealing a torso covered in prison tattoos and old shrapnel scars. He was panting, his movements twitchy and erratic. "If his body temperature hits 105, his organs start shutting down," Elle said. "He is going to get desperate. He knows he is dying. He wants to take someone with him." "SWAT is 10 minutes out," Jenkins said. "We just wait him out." "Reynolds does not have 10 minutes, Elle replied. "Look at the doctor." Dr. Reynolds had stopped struggling. He was slumped against Thorne, his face a pale gray. "He is vasovagal," Elle noted, "or he is having a heart attack from the stress. Either way, if we wait for SWAT, we are retrieving a corpse." Ella stood up. She walked over to the medication dispensary, the Pyxis machine. "Open it," she ordered Brenda. "Elle, I cannot without an order." Brenda started, then looked at Elle's face. She typed in her code. The drawer popped open with a hiss. Elle reached in. She did not grab bandages. She grabbed vials: ketamine 500 milligrams, midazolam 10 milligrams, haloperidol 10 milligrams, the B-52 bomb, a chemical cocktail strong enough to tranquilize a horse. She drew it all up into a single large syringe. She capped it and palmed it, hiding it against her wrist, securing it with a strip of medical tape so it would not drop. "What are you doing?" Jenkins asked, standing up. "You are not going in there." "He wants Emily," Elle said calmly. "He wants his sister." She reached up and pulled her hair out of the ponytail, letting it fall around her face. She took off her glasses and placed them on the desk. She grabbed a patient gown from a pile of clean laundry and pulled it over her scrubs. "I am about the same height as her," Elle said. "Blonde hair. If I keep my head down in this lighting, I can pass." "This is suicide," Jenkins said, stepping in front of her. "I cannot let a civilian do this." Elle looked up at him. "I was a field medic in the 75th Ranger Regiment for 6 years, Sergeant," she said. She was not technically a ranger, but she had been attached to special operations units as a cultural support team medic. She had seen more combat in Kandahar than Jenkins had seen in 20 years on the Seattle streets. "I am not a civilian. I am the only person here who can get close enough to stick him." Jenkins hesitated. The authority in her voice was undeniable. The rookie nurse had vanished completely. Standing there was a warrior. "5 minutes," Jenkins whispered. "If things go south, we breach, flashbangs and lead." "Give me 3," Elle said. She walked out from behind the nurse's station into the open hallway. She held her hands up, showing open palms. The syringe was taped to the inside of her right wrist, hidden by the sleeve of the patient gown. "Marcus," she called out. Her voice trembled perfectly, a manufactured fear. "Marcus, it is me. It is Emily." Inside the trauma bay, the giant froze. He shoved Reynolds aside, letting the doctor crumple to the floor. He pressed his face against the glass. The delirium blurred his vision. He did not see Elle Bennett, the nurse who had thrown him. He saw a small blonde figure in a hospital gown crying. "Emily," he croaked. The rage in his face broke, replaced by a twisted, agonizing sorrow. "Emmy, I am sick, Marcus," Elle cried, stepping closer. "Please, I just want to go home. Let the doctor go." "Let him go and I will come with you." Thorne hesitated. He looked at Reynolds, then at the door. "Open the door, Marcus," Elle pleaded. "Please." Thorne shoved the crash cart aside. The metal legs screeched against the floor. He hit the release button. The glass door slid open. Elle stepped into the lion's den. The smell inside Trauma Bay 1 was primal. It smelled of fear, sharply acidic, and the copper scent of blood. Elle stepped inside, keeping her head lowered, sobbing quietly. It was a performance that would have earned an Oscar. Every muscle in her body was coiled tight, ready to spring. But on the outside, she looked like a broken, terrified sister. "Emmy," Marcus breathed. He towered over her. Up close, the damage Ella had inflicted earlier was visible. His nose was a ruin of purple flesh. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. "I am here, Marcus," Ella whispered. She took a step closer. She needed to get within arm's reach. She needed to hit a vein, or at least a large muscle group like the deltoid or the thigh. With the amount of drugs in his system, an intramuscular injection might take too long, but it was her best shot. Marcus reached out, his hand shaking, and touched her hair. "You left me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You left me alone with them." "I am sorry," Ella said. She saw Dr. Reynolds in the corner. He was conscious, staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. She made a subtle hand motion to him. "Stay down. We have to go," Marcus said, his paranoia spiking again. He grabbed Ella's shoulder. His grip was bruising. "They are coming. The demons. We have to go now." He pulled her toward him, embracing her. This was it. Ella was pressed against his chest. His arms were wrapped around her, pinning her left arm, but her right arm, the one with the syringe, was free. She quietly peeled the tape, holding the syringe to her wrist. She uncapped the needle with her thumb. She looked at his neck. The external jugular vein was bulging thick as a rope. A perfect target. She raised the needle. "You are not Emily." The voice was a low growl right in her ear. Ella froze. Marcus pushed her back, holding her at arm's length. He stared into her face. The delusion had flickered out for just a second, a moment of lucidity in the sea of madness. He saw the scrubs underneath the gown. He saw the fierce intelligence in her eyes that his sister, broken by years of trauma, never had. "You are the nurse," he realized. His face twisted from sorrow back to pure unadulterated hate. "You tricked me." He saw the needle in her hand. No, Elle screamed, lunging forward. trying to stab the syringe into his neck before he could react. But Marcus was fast, terrifyingly fast. He caught her right wrist in midair, inches from his throat. His grip crushed down. Ella cried out as she felt the bones in her wrist grind together. The syringe fell from her numb fingers, clattering to the floor. "You tried to poison me," Marcus snarled. He did not hit her. He did not throw her. He grabbed her by the throat with one hand and slammed her against the wall, lifting her feet off the floor. Ella choked, her hands scrabbling at his wrist. This was worse than before. He was not just holding her. He was squeezing the life out of her. "Liar," Marcus spat. "Traitor." Dr. Reynolds, seeing his savior about to die, finally found his courage. He grabbed a metal kidney basin from the floor, the only weapon he had, and scrambled up. "Hey," Reynolds shouted, his voice cracking. He smashed the metal basin over the back of Marcus's head. It was like hitting a bear with a tin can. Marcus did not even drop Elle, he just turned his head slowly, looking at Reynolds with annoyance. "Bad move, Doc," Marcus grunted. He threw Elle. She flew across the room, smashing into the glass cabinets filled with saline bags. The glass shattered, raining down on her. She hit the floor, gasping, her vision going dark. Marcus turned his full attention to Reynolds. He grabbed the doctor by the lapels of his white coat and headbutted him. Reynolds crumpled instantly unconscious, blood pouring from his nose. Marcus turned back to Ella. She was trying to crawl toward the door, dragging her injured body through the broken glass. "No more games," Marcus said. He reached down to his boot. He pulled out a knife. It was a combat knife, a kabar with a 6-inch serrated blade. He had hidden it well. The police had not seen it. Ella had not seen it. "I am going to cut the lies out of you," Marcus whispered, walking toward her. Ella looked up. She was cornered, unarmed, injured. The police were outside, afraid to breach because they could not see the hostages clearly. She looked at the floor. The syringe was gone, kicked under a cabinet, but something else was there. The crash cart Marcus had used to block the door. On top of it sat the defibrillator. Ella's eyes locked onto it, the paddles, charged to 200 joules. It was a desperate, reckless idea. Defibrillators do not work like they do in the movies. You cannot just shock someone across the room. You have to make contact, and the safety mechanisms are designed to prevent accidental discharges. But this was an older model, the ZR series. Ella knew how to bypass the safety check. You could force a discharge in manual mode. Marcus raised the knife. Ella scrambled backward, not away from him, but toward the crash cart. "Stay still," Marcus hissed. Elle grabbed the paddles. She yanked them from the cradle. She hit the analyze button, then quickly switched to manual. She dialed the energy knob to max 360 joules. The machine whined, a high-pitched capacitor charge sound rising in pitch. "Clear," Elle screamed, mostly to psych herself up. Marcus lunged with the knife. Elle thrust the paddles forward. She did not try to place them on his chest. She jammed them onto his face. One paddle on his left cheek, one on his neck. She hit the orange shock buttons on the handles. The sound of electricity arsing through flesh was sickening. 360 joules of raw energy bypassed Marcus's skin resistance and slammed directly into his brain stem and vagus nerve. It was not a heart restart. It was a neurological reboot. Marcus went rigid. His back arched so violently it looked like it might snap. The knife flew from his hand, embedding itself in the ceiling tile. His eyes rolled back into his head until only the whites showed. He stayed rigid for 1 second, suspended by the current, and then collapsed like a building imploding. He hit the floor face first and did not move. Smoke curled up from the burns on his face. Elle dropped the paddles. She slumped against the crash cart, panting, trembling uncontrollably. Silence returned to the room. Then the glass door shattered inward as the SWAT team finally breached. Flashbangs rolling into the room. "Police, get down. Get down." Men in black armor stormed in, rifles raised. They saw the unconscious giant. They saw the unconscious doctor. And they saw the small nurse, bleeding, covered in glass, sitting against the cart, staring at her hands. A SWAT officer approached her, weapon lowered. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Elle looked up. She spat out a mouthful of blood. "I am going on break," she whispered. And then she passed out. The first thing Elle noticed was the silence. The ER was never silent. Even at 4 in the morning, there was always the hum of machines, the squeak of shoes, the distant moan of pain. But this silence was heavy, thick, and sterile. She opened her eyes. She was not in the ER. She was in a recovery room upstairs in the ICU. She tried to sit up, but her body screamed in protest. Her left arm was in a sling. Her right wrist was heavily splintered. Her head throbbed with a rhythm that matched the beeping of the monitor beside her. "Easy, Tiger." The voice was soft, lacking its usual serrated edge. Elle turned her head to see Brenda Miller sitting in the visitor's chair. The formidable charge nurse looked tired. Her makeup was smeared and she was holding a lukewarm cup of cafeteria coffee. Brenda Elle croaked. Her throat felt like she had swallowed razor blades, a lingering souvenir from Marcus Thorne's grip. "You have been out for 6 hours," Brenda said. She stood up and checked Elle's IV drip. Concussion. Hairline fracture in the left clavicle, severe sprain in the right wrist, massive bruising on the neck. "You look like you went 10 rounds with a threshing machine." Ella managed a weak smile. "You should see the other guy." "I did," Brenda said, her face darkening. "He is in the secure ward at Harborview, coma. Doctors say the electrical shock rebooted his heart rhythm, but he will live. He is going to spend the rest of his life in a cage, Elle. But he is alive." The door opened and Dr. Reynolds walked in. The arrogant physician looked different. He had a bandage across his nose where Marcus had headbutted him and 2 black eyes that were already swelling shut. He was not walking with his usual strut. He walked like an old man. He stopped at the foot of Elle's bed. He looked at Brenda, then at Ella. He struggled to find the words. The police reviewed the security footage. Reynolds said, his voice quiet. "And Officer Jenkins's body cam. Am I being charged?" Elle asked, panic rising slightly. "For the defibrillator. It was unauthorized use of medical equipment." Reynolds laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Charged. Elle, half the police department is outside waiting to get your autograph." Jenkins told the chief that if you had not tackled him, he would have blown the O2 tanks and leveled the building. "And if you had not gone into that room," Reynolds looked down at his hands. "I froze. I have been an attending for 10 years. I talk a big game. But when that monster grabbed me, I turned into a child. You saved my life. You saved Emily. You saved everyone." Ella looked at the ceiling. "I just did the job, doctor." "No," Reynolds shook his head. "I mocked you. I called you a rookie. I said you would not last 2 weeks. I was wrong. You are the best nurse I have ever seen." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was the shift schedule for the next month. "I took the liberty of crossing out traveler next to your name," Reynolds said. "I wrote in staff, if you want a permanent position, charge pay. Nobody will ever question you again." Ella looked at the paper. She thought about the adrenaline, the fear, the violence. She thought about the way the giant fell. Most people would run from a job where they almost died. "I will think about it," Elle whispered. "But first I need some Jell-O. I am starving." It took 6 weeks for Elle Bennett to return to St. Jude's Medical Center. When she walked through the automatic doors of the ambulance bay on a rainy Tuesday night, the glass had been replaced. The scuff marks on the floor where Marcus Thorne had rampaged were buffed out, though if you looked closely at the linoleum near Trauma 1, you could still see the faint scorch marks from the defibrillator paddles. Big Mike was back at the security desk. He had a titanium plate in his jaw now, and his smile was a little crooked, but he stood up the moment Elle walked in. He did not say a word. He just saluted, a sharp, respectful salute usually reserved for officers. Elle blushed and hurried past him to the nurses' station. The atmosphere in the ER had changed. The tension was still there, the medical tension of dying patients and rushing gurneys, but the social hierarchy had been completely upended. When Ella logged into her computer, she noticed something. The residents, usually loud and dismissive of the nursing staff, quieted down. Dr. Reynolds was intubating a patient in bed 3. He looked up, saw Ella, nodded respectfully, and went back to work. There were no more jokes about her height, no more whispers about her being a rookie. "Bennett?" Brenda's voice boomed from the triage desk. "Yes, Brenda?" Elle asked, bracing herself for an order to clean up a bedpan. "Dr. Reynolds needs a chest tube tray in Trauma 2. And take the new girl with you." Brenda gestured to a young nurse standing in the corner. The new girl looked terrified. She was 22, fresh out of nursing school, clutching her stethoscope like a rosary. She looked at Ella with wide eyes. "Hi," the new girl squeaked. "I am Jessica. I heard about you." Ella paused. She adjusted her scrub top. "What did you hear?" "They call you the Titan Slayer," Jessica whispered. "Is it true? Did you really take down a 7-foot guy with a pair of scissors and a shockbox?" Elle sighed. The legend had already grown out of control. In another month the story would probably involve her breathing fire and catching bullets with her teeth. "Jessica," Elle said, her voice calm and steady. "I did not slay a Titan. I just protected my patients. That is the job. It is not about being a hero. It is about being the last line of defense when the world breaks down." She handed Jessica a pair of gloves. "Now come on," Elle said, walking toward Trauma 2. "Dr. Reynolds gets cranky if we are slow." And trust me, you do not want to see me when I am cranky. As they walked down the hall, Elle glanced at the security monitor one last time. It was quiet. The rain lashed against the glass. The city was chaotic, dangerous, and unpredictable. But inside St. Jude's on Elle Bennett's watch, the monsters did not stand a chance. The rookie was gone. The veteran had arrived. That is the incredible true story of Elle Bennett. In a world that constantly told her she was too small, too quiet, and too inexperienced, she proved that true strength is not measured in pounds or inches. It is measured in the will to stand your ground when everyone else runs away. Marcus Thorne was a force of nature, but Elle was a force of will. She saved her patient. She saved the police. And she saved the doctor who mocked her. She reminds us that heroes do not always wear capes. Sometimes they wear oversized scrubs and carry trauma shears. If this story got your heart racing, please hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel. Do not forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a true story. Share this video with a nurse or a doctor in your life to show them some respect. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.